cultures care deeply about whether other people follow those rules. Now, I want to suggest to you, and to help you see why this debate that I'm going to focus on is important, even if you're not a philosopher, is there's something very odd about the way John and his collaborators are proceeding here. Why? Well, surely he doesn't think that these politically liberal researchers responsible for the inappropriate narrowing of the moral domain are unaware that rules governing these other matters are widespread in other cultures. He's not accusing those he disagrees with of being anthropological illiterates. That's not what he's saying. The issue in dispute is not whether rules like this exist in many cultures or whether people care deeply about them. The issue is whether those rules are moral rules, and to resolve that dispute, we need an account of what it is for a rule to be a moral rule. That is to say, we need to be able to draw the distinction, the boundary suggested on that little graph. All right, so that's the first issue I'm going to talk about. And the structure of this, by the way, is I'm going to tell you about the issues, try to explain what they are, and then cycle through again and tell you why I think empirical work bears on them and can advance the debate. So the second set of issues I want to talk about deals with the notions of realism, relativism, and skepticism in moral theory. So once we have some idea about which judgments are the moral ones and which ones are the non-moral ones, it's an obvious question to ask, right? Which is, which moral judgments are correct, okay? But not all philosophers like that question. Indeed, some philosophers think that that question is seriously misleading. Some don't. Let me start with the ones who don't. Philosophers who are called moral realists have no real qualms with the question. They think that at least most cases, there may be a few exceptions for special reasons, but most moral judgments are either correct or incorrect in roughly the same way that judgments in mathematics or in science or in history are correct or incorrect. Okay, so that's the view of the moral realists. But moral relativists disagree. They think that moral judgments are more like legal judgments. So consider the following legal judgment. Gay marriage is legal. Well, notice gay marriage is legal is true in Canada. Gay marriage is legal is not true in Florida. Okay? So rather than a picture like this that the moral realists suggest, where there are correct and incorrect moral judgments and rules, the moral relativists suggest a picture like this. There are some that are correct in our society, others that were correct in ancient Greek society, still others in Machigengan society, in the Dani society, in the Yano society, and so on. So that, maybe there is a little bit more overlap, and would be hard to display that on the slide, but that's the picture of the relativists. Third group of philosophers in this area are the moral skeptics, sometimes called moral nihilists, who disagree both with the realists and with the relativists. Okay? What the moral skeptics maintain is that no moral judgments are none are either true nor false, even when relativized to a culture. In effect, what the skeptics are saying, or many of them, is that moral judgments just aren't in that line of work. That's not what a moral judgment is doing. There are, of course, lots of different kinds of skeptics, but one famous family of skeptics are the emotivists, who maintain that moral judgments are basically expressions of emotion. And an expression of an emotion isn't the sort of thing that can be true or false. Okay? All right, so that's the realist picture. The skeptics give you this picture, that is to say, no true or false moral judgments at all. Though, of course, they don't deny that there are judgments which are moral judgments and others which are aesthetic or prudential or scientific or what have you. All right. Moral realism, which is really the view I'm going to focus on for most of the part of the talk devoted to this issue, is compatible with there being a lot of disagreement about moral matters, just as scientific realism, the view that most scientific claims are either true or false, is also compatible with there being a lot of disagreement. After all, we just might not know which one is true or false. We might not have figured it out yet. Whoops, sorry. Indeed, most moral realists, and everybody else, in fact, recognize that scientific disagreements, or more broadly, factual disagreements, are a major source of moral disagreement. So if you and I disagree on a factual matter, that may engender a disagreement about a moral matter. Like what? Well, suppose Al and Dick disagree about the causes of global warming. It's a factual question. Okay? Al might believe that the U.S. should sign the Kyoto Treaty. Maybe Kyoto Treaty still on the floor, or has it been decimated? I don't know. Dick might believe that the U.S. should not sign the Kyoto Treaty, but that disagreement might dissolve if they came to agree on the factual issues in dispute, namely what the causes are of global warming are, and therefore whether the Kyoto Treaty would address those causes. All right, but since moral realists think that moral judgments are correct or incorrect in roughly the same way as judgments in math and science, they maintain that moral disputes, or at least most of them, are resolvable at least in principle. And to make the point as clearly as I can, let me make it out of their own mouths. Richard Boyd, one of the fathers of so-called Cornell moral realism, a major school in this area, Boyd says, careful philosophical examination will reveal that agreement on non-moral issues would eliminate almost all disagreement about the sorts of issues which arise in ordinary moral practice. Get rid of the factual disagreements, you get rid of most of the moral disagreements. David Brink, an eminent philosopher at UCSD, says it's incumbent on the moral realist to claim that most moral disputes are resolvable, at least in principle. All right, so I've now spent the time I'm going to spend trying to explain the issues. Part two is, in effect, my attempt to try to convince you that science can productively join these debates and conversations. I'm going to start with the debate about the definition of morality. So what I tried to convince you of is, for John Haidt's purposes, for Richard Joyce's purposes, for a lot of other, for the philosophical purpose, there has to be a right definition. It can't just be anybody's stipulation. So a natural question to start with is, well, what counts as getting a definition right in this area? What counts as getting the correct answer to the definition of morality? Well, of course, in some cases, the definition of a term, particularly a more or less common sense term like moral or morality, is determined by how speakers actually use the term. But as people working in the philosophy of language and linguistics and semantics have noted, there are some exceptions to this. So-called natural kind terms, in those cases, ordinary usage can often simply be overruled when science discovers the nature of the kind that the term is trying to pick out. And the parade case for this is, of course, vastly oversimplified, but it'll give you the clear idea. It's the example everybody alludes to first. At one time, common sense usage classified whales as fish. So if you just explored common sense usage, it would turn out that the correct definition of whale includes fish. But